He told her to move along at 9:22 on a Saturday morning, loud enough that the woman pushing a stroller on the other side of the street turned around to look. Nkechi Adeyemi did not move. She was standing on the sidewalk in front of City Hall with a handwritten sign she had made the night before on the back of a flattened cereal box, the letters written in black marker, each one careful and even, the way she did everything. The sign read, 31 years, no pension, no answer. Officer Dale Prosser, badge 441, told her that this constituted unlawful assembly and that she needed to clear the area immediately or he would be forced to place her in custody. Nkechi looked at him. She was 61 years old, 5'2", 134 pounds, wearing a pressed navy blouse she had ironed that morning at 5:45 a.m. and the low black shoes she kept for what she called serious occasions. She said, "I know my rights." Prosser stepped forward and said it again, louder, and three people who had been walking past stopped walking and took out their phones. The video that the man in the yellow jacket posted at 9:31 a.m. would have 2.3 million views by the following Tuesday. But before any of that happened, a woman named Constance Owusu Boateng, who had been watching from a bench 11 feet away and who had once eaten Sunday lunch every week for 9 years at Nkechi Adeyemi's kitchen table, took out her phone and dialed a number that most people in the city of Atlanta did not have. She had been carrying that number for 6 years. Nkechi Mensah, she had taken her husband's name and kept her own beside it, hyphenating nothing, simply carrying both, had worked for the City of Atlanta's Department of Public Works for 31 years, 2 months, and 14 days. She had started at 29, the year her son Emeka was born, because the city job had health insurance and her husband Kwadwo had just lost his position at the processing plant on Fulton Industrial, and they had $340 in a joint account, and a baby who had arrived 6 weeks early and spent 11 days in the NICU. She had taken the job at the entry level, permit technician grade 2, earning $23,400 a year. Over the next 31 years, she had moved up to permit supervisor, then to senior infrastructure coordinator, then in the final 8 years before the department's restructuring, to deputy director of capital project review, a position she had created herself, effectively, by identifying a gap in how the city evaluated long-term infrastructure costs and writing a 34-page internal report that the director had initially filed without reading and then retrieved from the file 3 months later when a bridge on Bankhead Highway failed a stress inspection. 4. The exact reasons Nkechi had outlined on pages 18 through 22. She had never asked for credit for the report. She had asked only that the recommendation be implemented, and it had been, and the city had avoided 3 infrastructure failures in the following 4 years that the department's own engineers later estimated would have cost $14 million in emergency repairs. She had not been given a raise after any of these. She had been given, on the occasion of her 25th year of service, a framed certificate printed on cardstock and a $50 gift card to a restaurant that had closed by the time she tried to use it. The department restructuring came in March of the previous year. It was described in the official city communication as a modernization initiative. What it involved, in practice, was the elimination of 11 senior positions, the reclassification of 4 others, and the creation of a new automated permitting system that replaced the institutional knowledge of the people who had been removed with a software platform that had, in its first 6 months of operation, generated 847 processing errors and misrouted 23 capital project applications to the wrong department entirely. Nkechi's position was among those eliminated. She had been called into the director's office on a Wednesday afternoon and told that her role had been identified as redundant under the new structure. The director, a man named Gerald Foote, who had been appointed 18 months earlier and who had spent his career in private municipal consulting, had a way of speaking about personnel decisions that made them sound like weather, unfortunate, impersonal, beyond anyone's control. He told her that her service had been exemplary. He used the word exemplary. He did not look up from the folder in front of him when he said it. She had walked out of that building at 4:37 p.m. on a Wednesday in March, carrying a cardboard box with the contents of her desk, and the young man at the security desk had, not unkindly, but automatically, asked for her badge before she reached the door. The pension dispute began the following month. Under the city's defined benefit plan, employees who had served 30 or more years at a qualifying grade level were eligible for a full pension disbursement beginning at age 60. Nkechi had served 31 years. She had turned 61 in January. The city's benefits office informed her, in a letter dated April 9th, that a review of her employment classification records had determined that a 3-year period of her service, specifically the years in which she held the title of Senior Infrastructure Coordinator, had been reclassified retroactively as a temporary contract appointment rather than a permanent civil service position, which meant that those years did not qualify toward her pension calculation. The reclassification reduced her qualifying service period below the 30-year threshold. She was therefore not eligible for the full pension. She would receive a partial disbursement of $614 per month, beginning at age 65. She had read the letter at the kitchen table on the morning of April 10th. She had read it once, carefully, front and back. Then she had set it down in the center of the table, parallel to the table's edge, the way she set everything down, precisely, without drama. Then she had made herself a cup of tea, ginger, the way her mother had taught her, with the water just below boiling and the bag left in for 4 minutes exactly. She had drunk the tea, and then she had gotten up and retrieved the thick manila envelope she kept in the second drawer of her bedroom dresser, where she had been collecting documents for 11 months, her original appointment letter from 1993, her annual performance reviews going back 22 years, her pay stubs for the years in question, and a copy of the HR reclassification policy document she had obtained through a public records request in February, 3 weeks before she was called into Gerald Footy's office, because she had seen it coming and had prepared accordingly. She had spent 4 months attempting to resolve the dispute through the city's internal appeals process. She had appeared at 3 appeals hearings and brought documentation to each one. The first hearing had been postponed because the hearing officer had a scheduling conflict. The second had produced a written finding that was sent to the wrong address and arrived 11 days after the deadline to respond to it. The third had upheld the reclassification on the basis of a procedural determination Nkechi had not been notified was under review. After the third hearing, she had called the benefits office 17 times over the following 6 weeks. On 11 of those calls, she had been placed on hold and then disconnected. On 4, she had reached a representative who had taken her information and told her someone would follow up. On 2, she had reached a supervisor named Marcus who had said each time that the matter was under review and that he could not provide a timeline. She had kept a log of every call, date, time, length of call, name of representative if given, summary of what was said. The benefits office was in a building on Mitchell Street with a lobby that smelled of carpet cleaner and the particular stale cold air of a space where the ventilation system runs too hard for too long. The chairs in the waiting area were orange plastic, the kind bolted to a metal rail so they could not be rearranged. There was a number dispenser on a stand near the door, the kind with a red digital counter above it, and the counter on the Tuesday of the third hearing had read 47 when Nkechi arrived and 73 by the time she was called. She had sat in one of the orange chairs for 1 hour and 11 minutes with her folder on her lap. The folder she had covered in brown paper and labeled in blue marker, the same way she had covered her son's school books when he was in the 4th grade and she could not afford the store covers. The woman next to her was eating a sandwich from a paper bag, and when Nkechi sat down, the woman had looked at the folder, then at Nkechi, and then she had reached into the bag and held out a second sandwich without saying anything. Nkechi had said, "No, thank you." The woman had said, "It's just a cheese one." "I brought 2 by mistake." Nkechi had looked at her, and she had taken the sandwich. It was sharp cheddar on white bread, plain, the kind that is easy to make at 6:30 in the morning when you are also making the first sandwich. She ate it in 3 bites and folded the paper neatly and put it in her bag. The woman beside her did not say anything else. When Nkechi's number was called, the woman said, quietly, without looking up, "Good luck." That was the last kind thing that building offered her for 4 months. The October morning she made the sign. She rose at 4:55, an hour before her usual time. The weather app on her phone said 54 degrees in Atlanta, which meant the navy blouse would be cold, but she had worn colder things for less important reasons. She ironed the blouse, pressing the collar twice the way she always did. And she made tea, and she sat at the kitchen table in the dark before the sun came up, with the folder open in front of her and the cereal box cut flat beside it. And she wrote the letters on the sign slowly and carefully. 31 years. No pension. No answer. 3 lines. She counted what she needed to say and found that was all of it. Then she folded the manila envelope under her arm and she took the 7:40 bus downtown because parking near City Hall on a Saturday was $18, and she was watching every dollar now, the way she had watched every dollar in the year Emeka was born, the way she suspected she would be watching them for some time yet. If you can feel where this is going, stay with me, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything. And it starts with a woman on a bench who knew something nobody in that precinct was prepared for. Constance Owusu Boateng was 64 years old and had retired 2 years earlier from a position as Deputy Chief of Staff in the Mayor's office, where she had worked for 9 years across 2 administrations. She and Nkechi had met at a community budget meeting in 2009, sat next to each other by accident because they had both arrived early, discovered they had grown up within 4 miles of each other in 2 different countries, Nkechi in Enugu, Constance in Kumasi, and had become, over the following decade, the kind of friends who did not need to explain things to each other from the beginning. After Constance retired, they had Sunday lunch every week at Nkechi's kitchen table for 3 years, until Constance's daughter moved to Baltimore, and Constance followed. And then the lunches became phone calls, long ones, on Sunday afternoons, with the same quality of attention. Constance had come back to Atlanta for her granddaughter's christening that weekend. She had not known Nkechi would be at City Hall that morning. She had been walking past on her way to meet her daughter for coffee when she saw the navy blouse, the careful sign, and the officer's voice rising on a Saturday when the sidewalk was not even crowded, when there was no reasonable public safety justification for what she was watching. And she had sat down on the bench and she had taken out her phone. The number she dialed belonged to the mayor of Atlanta. She had his direct cell phone because she had spent 9 years anticipating problems before they became incidents, and a person who spent 9 years doing that for 2 mayors retained a certain kind of access that did not expire with the job title. The mayor answered on the 3rd ring. She told him what she was watching. She told him who the woman was. She gave him one piece of information she had been carrying since a conversation at a church function 8 months earlier. A piece of information that made the mayor go quiet for 4 full seconds before he said, "Don't let her be arrested. I'm calling the station now." The piece of information was this, that the city's HR director had personally flagged Nkechi's pension file for reclassification in the same week he had approved a severance arrangement for Gerald Footy's former deputy, a man who had served 11 years, 2 of which overlapped with a period in which the man had been on extended administrative leave, a period that had been quietly reclassified as active service in order to qualify him for the same full pension Nkechi had been denied. The mayor was on the phone with Precinct 6's watch commander by 9:24 a.m., 92 seconds after Constance dialed. Officer Prosser's radio crackled at 9:25. He was in the middle of his 3rd instruction to Nkechi, the one where he had reached for his handcuffs on the left side of his belt. The crackle was followed by his watch commander's voice, which had a particular quality Prosser had not heard directed at him before: level, careful, and containing something underneath it that was not anger exactly but was in the same family. The instruction was brief: stand down, stand by. Do not take any further action. Prosser took his hand off his belt. He looked at Nkechi. She had not moved. She was still holding the sign. They looked at each other across approximately 6 feet of Atlanta sidewalk on a Saturday morning in October, and the moment had an odd quality of stillness, the way moments have when something large has just shifted and neither person has been told yet what it shifted into. Nkechi did not lower the sign. The mayor's car arrived at City Hall at 9:51 a.m. He came without a press secretary and without a photographer, which was noticed immediately by the people who had continued filming on their phones and by the 2 reporters from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who had arrived after seeing the video and who had recognized, from the navy blouse and the sign, that something specific and documentable was standing on that sidewalk. The mayor walked directly to Nkechi. He was a tall man, 58, with the slightly deliberate walk of someone who had learned to move through public spaces without signaling direction until the last possible moment. He introduced himself by his first name, which she knew, and he said, "I know why you're here. I'd like to talk if you're willing." Nkechi looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "My knees are giving me some trouble. Is there somewhere to sit?" They sat on the bench where Constance had been sitting. Constance was no longer there. She had moved back 20 feet and was leaning against a planter, watching with the expression of someone who had arranged a table and was now waiting to see who sat where. The mayor asked Nkechi to tell him what had happened. She told him in chronological order, the way she organized everything. She did not editorialize. She presented the sequence of events, the appointment, the 31 years, the restructuring, the letter, the 3 hearings, the 17 phone calls, the log. She mentioned the log specifically, and when she said it, the mayor said, "You kept a log." She said, "I keep records of everything. I did it for 31 years at that building." She gestured towards City Hall. "Because that is how you protect the city's investment, and that is how you protect yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. "Did anyone ever tell you why your classification was changed retroactively?" She said, "No." He said, "I'm going to find out." She looked at him and said, "I've been trying to find out for 4 months." He said, "I know. That's a failure, and I'm going to tell you that directly." She did not respond immediately. When she did, she said, "Thank you for saying that out loud." The internal review the mayor ordered that Monday morning was assigned to the city's Inspector General's office, which operated independently of the department under review. The IG was a woman named Dr. Adaize Nwosu, 52, who had spent 17 years in public sector accountability work, and who had, in the previous 3 years, produced findings that had resulted in 2 department head terminations and 1 referral to the Fulton County DA's office. She began with the pension classification records, then expanded to the full reclassification database for the previous 4 years. What she found, over the following 6 weeks, was documented in a report of 89 pages. The report found that 14 senior city employees had had their service classifications retroactively altered in connection with the departmental restructuring. Of the 14, 11 had their qualifying service periods reduced, affecting pension eligibility. Of those 11, 9 were Black women. The remaining 3 reclassifications, 2 of which resulted in enhanced pension eligibility, involved employees in Gerald Foote's prior consulting network. The reclassifications had been processed through HR using a batch update function that the system administrator had approved in a single authorization in February, 4 weeks before the restructuring was announced. The HR director resigned on the day the report was released. Gerald Foote's severance arrangement was suspended pending review of his own reclassification documentation. The city attorney's office notified the 11 affected employees that their classification records would be corrected and that their pension calculations would be recalculated using their full qualifying service periods. The letters went out on a Thursday. Nkechi's letter arrived on a Friday morning. She read it at the kitchen table, the same chair. She read it once, then she got up and called Constance, and Constance answered. And Nkechi said, It came. Constance said, "I know. I heard this morning." There was a pause, not an empty one, the kind that is full of things both people already know and do not need to say. Then Constance said, "Did you eat?" Nkechi said, "Not yet." Constance said, "Sunday. I'll come." Nkechi said, "Come early. I'll make jollof." The mayor, at a press conference held 3 weeks after the report was released, was asked by a reporter whether the incident on the sidewalk, the video, the officer's conduct, the call to the station, had been the trigger for what followed. He said, "The trigger was 31 years of documented service and 4 months of documented dismissal. What happened on that sidewalk was one woman deciding she was done being dismissed. I'm grateful she was still standing there when we finally paid attention." A reporter asked whether Officer Prosser would face any disciplinary action. The mayor looked at the question for a moment and then said, "What he did that morning will be reviewed under the department's conduct policy. What I'll tell you is that the woman he told to move along has forgotten more about how this city works than most people in that building will ever know." He did not say anything further on that subject. Nkechi did not attend the press conference. She was at the hardware store on Meridian Avenue, not the one that had been in the news, but a different one, the smaller one on Cascade Road, where she had been volunteering every other Saturday for 3 years, helping elderly residents in the neighborhood navigate permit applications for home repairs. She had started doing it in her second year at the city because she noticed that the people most likely to give up on a permit application were the ones who could least afford to leave their repairs undone, and she had never stopped. Not during the restructuring, not during the 4 months of hearings and phone calls, not once. She showed up at 9 a.m., 14 minutes before the posted start time, because that was how she had always done it. The pension payments began on the first of the following month. The amount was $3,847 per month, calculated at the full rate for 31 years of qualifying service. She did not spend any of it for the first 3 months. She saved it in the same account where she had been saving for 31 years. The one she had opened with $340 the year Emeka was born. On the first day of the 4th month, she wrote a check for $12,000 to a scholarship fund at the high school her son had attended, in memory of a teacher named Mrs. Pauline Akeampong, who had told Emeka at age 15, when he had briefly convinced himself he was not a person who could do mathematics, that he had the kind of mind that only looks slow from the outside, because it was building something the rest of the room hadn't seen yet. She wrote in the memo line, "For students who need someone to see them first." She kept the sign. It was still in her bedroom, behind the door, leaning against the wall. She had considered throwing it out several times and had decided each time to leave it there. Not as a monument, just as a record. She kept records of everything. She had done it for 31 years because that is how you protect what matters, and she was not going to stop now. There is something the people who design these systems believe about time. They believe that if they make a process long enough, complicated enough, slow enough, if they postpone the 3rd hearing and disconnect enough phone calls and send the written finding to the wrong address, eventually the person will exhaust herself. Eventually she will stop counting. Eventually the folder of documents will go into a drawer, and the drawer will stay closed, and the 31 years will be absorbed quietly into a budget line and a corrected record that nobody ever reads. What they do not account for is the person who has spent 31 years understanding exactly how the system works, who has already filed the public records request before they came for her position, who kept a log of 17 phone calls with dates and times and the names of the representatives, who arrived 14 minutes early on a Saturday morning in October with a handwritten sign on the back of a cereal box and stood on the public sidewalk because the building's front door had stopped answering. You cannot outlast someone who has been preparing longer than you've been planning. And you cannot move along someone who already knows exactly where she stands. If someone told you for 4 months that your 31 years didn't count, and you had the records to prove every single one of them, what would you do with those records? Not with the anger, with the records. Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.